Dear Creator of all that is, and ever will be, this is the great I am. And then we ask, who is responsible for me? The answer is, I am. Who is it that is responsible for my thoughts? The answer, I am. Who is responsible for determining my future? I am. And isn't it the same I am, I ask, who infuses us with that enigmatic spark of life and love at the first moment of this bodily creation? And Creator, isn't it the same I am who not only breathes us, but also restores us at night when we are sleeping? I hear a grateful yes. And isn't it the same I am who provides us with our senses and emotions to know how to provide for our bodily daily needs? Where does the I am of our beloved Creator begin or leave off? Where does our I am fit in? We are all of that. Creator, creation, co-creator. Unending, never leaving. Only in body do we leave, yet our spirit is ever graced and unending and ever in unity with the one Creator. Our bodies help us manifest our spirit's purpose, for we are more than spirit than flesh. We are more spirit than flesh and blood. Humankind is the I am reflection and fractal of our beloved Creator, who has given us the greatest tool of all to accomplish the seeming impossible. And that greatest tool is love. And we've been gifted a body to express it and manifest all that is goodly godly. To shine our light and our love is our purpose. And when we acknowledge this, that this is who we are, the light and the love of our Creator, we are strong, even indomitable, and joyful, and at peace. Be that, be love, say I am, and so be it.
So it is.
My name is Charlie White. I'm with the Statewide Jural Assembly, Oregon Statewide Jural Assembly, and we're here to interview Greg Kurtis. Some know him as the Seething Frog. I listened to him on his channel for quite a few years, off and on, and really appreciate this opportunity to connect with you and hash out what it is, the difference between de jure, de facto, common law, commercial law. And I want to introduce you, Greg, even though I haven't met you personally, and I didn't know that you were a bar attorney and prosecutor as that ex or present. I guess you're never an ex. So, a former bar attorney, prosecutor, anti-color of law, and a true patriot. You had upwards of 90,000 subscribers for your channel called Seething Frog. That's how I knew you. And it was deleted and removed. In fact, I went online and it says, this may be familiar. This account has been terminated due to multiple or severe violations of YouTube's policy prohibiting content designed to harass, bully, or threaten. Is that familiar? So that's what we're dealing with. And I want to have everyone introduce themselves who's on this interview. So Jeffrey, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, my name is Jeffrey Bowen, and I was a big fan of the Seething Frog, and I'm going to make this very brief because it's somewhat of a story, but I went to some friend's house one time and at the 4th of July party, and I walked in the room and the Seething Frog was sitting on the couch, and I had no idea that not only this man lived in Arizona, but he lived down the road, and we became friends ever since, and I started a YouTube channel that I closed down before they got to me. And that's where I met Ron and all of you guys. So Greg moved up to a remote area in the mountains of Arizona and started an off-grid ranch all by himself, literally building it himself. And I decided that it would be a good idea to follow him up to the same region. And so I moved up into this region as well. And so we here we are today, and it's an honor to be able to not we're not debating any of this stuff. We're actually trying to help one another and help you guys move this forward with any information that Greg can provide with his experience. And I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Wonderful. Greg, could you say a little bit about yourself? Just I did a very peripheral kind of introduction. So if you wanted to explain a little bit more.
All right. So I'm a Montana kid. I'm a farm kid. My dad was a John Deere dealer and farmer. I went to undergraduate not knowing what the hell I was going to do, and I guess that's still true. I stumbled into law, and it was in the early 70s, so now it's almost 50 years. At the time, we had civil rights, we had women's rights, we had fundamental rights, we had Watergate. Well, Montana had Watergate. We had our nation had Watergate, and Montana had workman's compensation. We had fundamental rights going on all around. We had the 1968 election. We had the Nixon matter, and we had the Vietnam War. And I felt that going to law school, I would have the opportunity to stick up for little people and to right some of the wrongs of our constitutional government. I think there were many of the kids in my law school class who felt the same. What I was profoundly disappointed in is that about 5 years into practice, when I met with them at various places, including being forced to take following on classes, that all they could talk about was how much money they were making, what their retirement plans looked like, the condos they'd bought, the trips they'd taken, and all of the stuff that was so deeply ingrained in them 5 years before had disappeared. And I realized that I was not one of them. And that has become more and more profoundly clear throughout the rest of my life. I've gotten so over the last 30 years, I hate most lawyers. I can't stand the law. I see it profoundly upside down. It makes me absolutely sick. And Charlie, just to correct you on one matter, I am not a BAR attorney. I've never been a BAR attorney. I was forced in 1975 to join the Montana State Bar. And the reason was ostensibly to have continuing legal education and that we all had to belong. So thereafter, the Bar Association provided us with 15 hours a year of classes, and I went. And that's the only way that you could keep your law license. But some of the folks have suggested, and I took great umbrage to it over my last 4 or 5 years as the Seething Frog, that because I was an attorney, I was obviously a BAR member, and that somehow I had sworn fealty to the Queen of England. And I can tell you that I feel the same way about the Queen of England that I do about COVID-19. You won't shoot me with it until I'm cold, face down, and my shotgun's empty. So let's start from there. Now, let me also say, and I know that some of what we're going to talk about reflects an interest in constitutional law or fundamental law and how it relates. And let me start off by telling you I'm not Alan Dershowitz. For better or worse, I'm not Alan Dershowitz. And that will tell you, first of all, that I'm not a Harvard lawyer that taught constitutional law. And on the other hand, that'll also tell you that I'm not a pedophile that rode with Jeffrey Epstein to the Magic Island. So I did teach law at the University of Washington when I was getting my MBA and when I was trying to extricate myself from the legal system and use it only peripherally for business and for the well-being of people that hired me to be positive. So I've said way more perhaps than you wanted me to say, but I wanted to give you a background on some of my philosophical approach to this. and perhaps we can talk about the things that truly interest you from this time forth.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Great introduction, and it gives us a good overview of what we want to launch into. I want to introduce Ron Vrooman and also William. So do you want to go ahead, Ron, and just do a brief I am?
Yeah, my name's Ron Vrooman. I'm with the Oregon Statewide Jural Assembly, and I really appreciate Greg coming, and thanks, Jeff, for bringing him.
William?
Yeah, I'm William Appel. I'm in the Portland, Oregon area. I'm with the Oregon Statewide Jural Assembly.
Thank you. So first question I have is when you all through your training as an attorney, bar attorney, whatever, as you became a bar attorney by necessity, what degree of common law were you aware of, or was there just at what point? I know you said you were 5 years into it, and all of a sudden you needed to sign up basically for the bar. But what juncture? How does common law fit into your training as a bar attorney? I guess that's my.
Yeah, so please don't say I'm a bar attorney, okay?
I won't say it again.
It's like, say, when did I become a liberal communist? What we were taught from the outset, and I think it's true, and I think it's something that I should share with you, is that where we come from is the basic British legal system. And what we brought with us in the 1600s was that basic British legal system. And it was fundamentally founded on common law and ecclesiastical law. And so the law of equity is ecclesiastical. And that was meant originally to go through the court systems of the Catholic Church. And the common law was supposed to be sanctioned by the king at the time and by the barons and the rest of that, enforced as such from there. And common law, basically, the basic idea of common law is that there is a product that has built upon case law over the ages that establishes basic fundamental rights through the court system, and has been built up by the layers and layers of the common law system. That is, the courts that were called common law, that was built up over time historically and was established as precedent. And precedent in the common law system was that a court case that was 5 or 10 or 300 years old is held to be true until everybody agrees that it's not. And then that things that are built upon that form a structural outline of the common law. So when I went to law school, for instance, in property law, we looked at common law cases clear back into the 1600s. And from that, the common law was built and brought into the United States, into the colonies, and then formed part of the common law of the various colonies and ultimately of the early states. Now, I may be answering more of the question than you want me to answer, but let me go on beyond that, because basically what happened in 1789 when we formed the Constitution was that our Constitution was supposed to supplant much of what was in the common law. And so some of the states that refused to sign it until there was a Bill of Rights inculcated the fundamental rights of the Bill of Rights and our first through 10th Amendment, if you like, that established certain things that were going to be true no matter what, and that were constitutionally implanted. And what the federal government and the state governments did after that was, as the states also formed commonwealths or states, they set up their own constitutions. And so what we have, for instance, in Oregon, And in Montana, where I practiced, and in Arizona here, we have a federal constitution that supposedly protects our rights and that does not concede rights. And this is an important concept. It does not concede basic fundamental rights to the federal government and also consequently to the state government. So that those things are our rights that we have not given up. And that those rights, as they're entitled to be inalienable, as that form of law goes clear back to Iranian times and Zoroastrian, and then through the Enlightenment and Locke and Berkeley and Hume and the rest of that, clear back into the 16 and 1700s, and through our Federalist Papers and the rest of that, those things were held to be fundamental to us as individuals and not part of the court system. So let me go more particularly, and this is something Jeff and I talked about today, is that common law, what has happened to common law, and let me give you an example. It's a simple example. What has happened to common law throughout the federal government and throughout the states is that as we have proceeded, the states and the federal government have supplanted what pieces of common law with statutes. And so to a greater or lesser extent, and in most states, one would say almost to an entirety, the statutes and the Constitution form your basis for law, not the common law. And what they would say then, and what a court system would say is, if they came upon a novel situation, they would say, well, there are no statutes and no constitutional basis upon which to determine whether or not, how we decide this case. And therefore, we will go back to 1643 and somebody versus Fox and say, well, this basic fundamental is established in accordance with such and such, and it's the closest thing to law we can come up with. So, let me leave it at that. But to give you the one example, and this is a pretty classic example that you'll all appreciate, and that is this. Under the old common law, there was a condition called common law marriage, okay? And people were held to be married even if they did not marry in a church or get a marriage license. And what has happened in the variety of states is that probably something like 2/3 of the states have either said there is no common law marriage, or we're going to do something about it which supplants what would otherwise have been the common law. So, for instance, some states, and I think Arizona is one of them, say you cannot be common law married. There is no space for common law to be married. We as the state renounced common law marriage as a right of individuals. In other words, you're not married unless you're licensed to be married. Other states, like Montana, for instance, have what they call, which is kind of an oxymoronic thing, is that they call it statutory common law. And in effect, what they did was say, well, under the old common law, for instance, you could be married if you lived together for a certain period of time, you held yourself out as married, you acted as though you're married, everybody else saw you as married, and therefore you would be effectively married, and one of the couple could claim to be married under those terms. Well, what Montana did was say, you have to hold yourself out as married, you have to intend to be married, and you have to live together or be in some kind of marital situation, quasi-marital situation for some period of time, and that will constitute a common law marriage, but it is statutory. So the statute has replaced the common law. And so you have a variety of different things that go on as it relates to what constitutes common law. And to the extent that the states could, and this is true especially federally, they've replaced any semblance of common law. So the question then is, when does common law come back in? And I think that's the question you guys are asking. When does common law come back into space? And I have some thoughts on that. So.
Thank you. Great overview, and helps understand the question I have then is, everything basically in commercial law or admiralty law is monetary. It's commercial. It's about money from birth to death. So we know that when we receive our birth certificate, we are bonded and we make money for people who want to make money on us. So I guess my question then is, that's the juncture. We are people on the land who want to be free from this system, Babylonian monetary system. And from your perspective, and I don't know how familiar you are with what we've been doing in terms of our documenting and our noticing and our presentment and all of the paperwork that we've been doing. And first of all, claiming our sovereignty on the land, on Oregon. So I guess that's a pretty broad question, but I'd like to have your input on what we're doing based on that juncture in our history of law.
So let me look at, and these are some things that I've focused on in the statement, and this is true not just in the United States, this is true worldwide, and this goes back thousands of years. There is a sense, if you have inalienable rights, there is a sense that because you can't give that up, you have the right to reclaim it at any time that you need to reclaim it, okay? Mm-hmm. That applies not just to property, which is obviously one of the pieces. If you go back both to the Jeffersonian Declaration of Independence, which says that we have the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And they replaced the word happiness. They replaced the word property, the right to an estate, the right to ownership, the right to property. And then in addition to that, they as part of the Bill of Rights said, all right, there are basic fundamental rights. And we see that in the First, Second, Fifth, and other amendments. And you've got the basic rights of freedom of speech, assembly, the press, and worship. And you also have, of course, everybody knows this, the Second Amendment. And why is it there? Well, the Second Amendment is there both to reflect the part of an inalienable right to protect yourself and to be secure and safe in your own home. And of course, what the federal system wants to say now is that you have a right to own guns so you can shoot rabbits and deer, when in fact our founding fathers said, no, not only is it to protect and keep us secure and safe in our own homes, but as Jefferson would have said, and as many of the founders would have said, it's there to protect us from the government. That's the point. And that's an inalienable right. And it goes clear back to Zoroaster. It goes clear back to the Greeks and Romans. It is that when the government so fundamentally violates our rights, that we have the right to deconstruct the government. And so we look at those basic fundamental rights as property, self-defense, the right to worship, which I don't mean to underplay, the right to be able to speak freely, to assemble, to the press, which is part of what we're doing today. This is the freedom in the press. I don't have to be a graduate journalist or working for CNN to be able to put out a pamphlet or a video that says this is what I believe. And so we have to be, and the other thing, and I find this wild because it includes the right to think freely, to be able to think whatever I want to think. And it also excludes the prohibition against hate speech, etc. You know, if I hate Easter or Easter bunnies or Easter eggs, I ought to be able to say I hate it, right? And that shouldn't reflect against somebody who treats Easter as a fundamental part of their religion. I should be able to say whatever I want to say about it. And so having the process of being able to get rid of me off Facebook is fundamentally wrong. And of course, not Facebook, but YouTube, using the facade that it is a private corporation, therefore it can permit or deny me to say anything on its channel that it wants to, fundamentally violates antitrust, which of course is also a protection for fundamental basic rights. When one agency, a private company, encompasses the public in a way that it prevents people from speaking or using fundamental rights, and because the process is so pervasive that there is no other outlet for it, it should not be allowed to prevent us from speaking freely. And we saw that with television and others. So I've segued a little bit, but not away from the subject. But basically, we can talk about how this breaks out. But was there a question, or did I?
Well, we're ending our show on cable access right now. We want everybody to continue this show on the dreaded YouTube. Please like and subscribe us on there, that evil place. I also would like to ask, under this common law stuff, I'm hearing some people claim that if you have ancestors that have been on this land prior to the Civil War, you might be in a better situation or class sake than individuals that just arrived yesterday.
All right, so let me speak to that narrowly, and then let me speak to it broadly, okay?
Thank you.
There are different parts of this country where people can claim, and I'm not denying those claims, that they are in some kind of special circumstance. It may be that because my great-great-grandfather was William Brewster in 1620, and he was wanted by the king, and they were going to hang him, that I have special rights because obviously as an objector to the process, and as a direct descendant of William Brewster, I have the right to speak out against him. I don't think that gets me very far. And let's look at this, and I think they're probably, and I've seen some stuff that Oregon, and this is no disrespect to you, Ron, but I've seen that the Oregon territories, or how it was formed, or how it was constitutionally set up, or who might have existed ahead of time, would have some kind of special compensation to do so. Let me give you an example that parallels this. There's a place called Socorro, New Mexico, and they looked at whether or not the ordinances and statutes were properly formed in the 1950s and concluded that perhaps Socorro had never been properly brought into New Mexico or to the United States. And they were looking at seceding at the time. El Paso, Texas thought they would be a great capital. So there was a whole bunch of people that tried to join in. And of course, it faded away after the FBI came looking for them and the rest of that, which is classic stuff. But let's not separate ourselves. I think that's the little picture. The big picture is that we need to all be in the same place. And we need to all find common ground that says we have a right to question and challenge and perhaps decommission this government, and to do so legitimately in accordance with our common law, inalienable right that says that the constitutional form of government, the statutory enforcement of the constitutional form of government is not legitimate. And when does that happen? Jefferson, I think, said that we need a revolution every 20 to 40 years. I can't remember exactly what the number is, but we have obviously gone past our expiration date, right?
I would like to say 7 years.
Excuse me?
Every 7 years is what I'd like to see.
Well, it's hard to keep your property if you have a revolution 3 out of every 10 years. And so somehow we need to find neutral ground in between it. But let me talk generally just to your organization and to organizations like it, including the one that Jeff has belonged to here in Arizona. And that is this. And I've said this from the start. And if you would look at my non-existent channel on YouTube, you would see that the cover page that I had on my channel said, unite the 10 million. Why did I do that? I said unite the 10 million because when I looked at the Revolutionary War, when I looked at our founding fathers saying this is illegitimate, the king is illegitimate. He is stepping on our fundamental rights, and we have the right to revolt and establish our own government. And on what basis did they do that? Well, when you look at the historical perspective of it, there was never more than 3% of the population that was physically, vocally, revolutionarily active. Okay, 3%. And there was arguably 10% that were flowing in and out of that 3%. And there was arguably 30% or so of the 2.5 million people that existed in 1776 who said, yes, we want to be away from the king, from King George. There were also loyalists. About a third of the people were loyalists. Did I do a survey? No, I can't quite do that survey, but let's use those numbers. And I think we have a situation very similar today. And this applies to all of us, folks, to all of us, not just Oregon, but everywhere. And that is this. A third of us know that this system is not working. A third of the people, and you can go outside and watch them go by in their cars with their masks on. You can watch them lined up for vaccines. You can watch them pasted to their face, pasted to CNN or Fox for that matter. And those folks are lost to us. But that's no different than it was 243 years ago, okay? 245 or whatever it is. It's no different. And so the encouraging part about this is, and this is the part that I think is critical to you in Oregon and to everybody elsewhere, and that is this, that if you have 3% of the population that is vocally
engaged
and is pushing to declare the illegitimacy of your state government, and you have 10% of the population that will in some fashion back you, and a third of the population that agrees with you, no matter what the other idiots do, I would say that you have critical mass, that you've hit the flashpoint. And so I would be less concerned. I'm not saying that having a court system and of trying people isn't the most effective way of doing it. It may very well be. It may be that that's what establishes the legitimacy of it, basically to have a mock trial. I'm not saying that. But what I would say to you is whenever you have, and I did the math, just let me finish this run and then I did the math. There's 4.2 million people in Oregon. What that takes to be active is 125,000. You hit close to 100,000 people that are up at arms about where things are, and I say you've hit the flashpoint. Go ahead,
Ron. We're looking at it a little bit differently. And when I explained our point of view to my granddaughter, who is a Nevada and California bar attorney, she said, Gramps, they don't teach that in law school. So what we say is all power is inherent in the people, and that is not just written. That's the truth, and we put it to practice. Then it says that there's a de jure law form and a de facto law form. And we looked that up and we checked it out in Blacks and various other places. And when you read the Constitution and you look at the founding documents, we are the people, and not from the preamble, but the actual people. And there's no number required, as we're a Republican form of government, not a democracy. We don't need a particular number. It would be nice to have 1,000 people in the street walking behind you when you go to the mayor to register your complaint, but it's not required. And we've come to the conclusion that when you take the stance that we have, that we are the people and all power is inherent in us, however many of us there are, and we have yet to tell anybody how many that is, then that's who we are. Then we take that information and much more, telling them we're going to have a civilian court and we're going to have a grand jury and we're going to do all of these things. And then we supply that information to the DOJ, the FBI, the Marshals, and the Marine Corps. And then we supply that same information to the state of Oregon and its governor and its attorney general and its secretary of state and 36 sheriffs and the entire Senate. And we tell them you have 7 days, 14 days, and 21 days, or you acquiesce to what we say, and then they acquiesce. And in some cases, we give them another 30 days and they acquiesce. And we read what is required to have a civilian common law court, and we make one. That's not a mock. That is an actual fact. And we take that information and we supply that information to Oregon and the de facto, and we name them as de facto. And we have a trial in a grand jury, and the grand jury provides a presentment to 38 prosecutors on Oregon to do your job. Prosecutorial discretion is no longer part of your job. You have a presentment from a lawful grand jury. That takes care of the de facto. Then we have the de jure side. The de facto cannot make a choice or make a decision or deal with the live man or woman on the land or soil jurisdiction. That's not their jurisdiction. Their jurisdiction is written down and it doesn't include me, doesn't include Charlie or William or you, unless you choose to be in that jurisdiction. And as a free man, you can step over into the United States jurisdiction and join the Army, join the cops, register to vote. You can do all those things that you want because you're a free man. And then you can step back out of that jurisdiction and into the jurisdiction of men and women again. And that's what we did. So the grand jury then provided a true bill to an Article 3, Amendment 7 court. There's no judge in our court. So that is in common law. Now, our court was originally a civilian court, and we made it a civilian court so that we could implement ex parte Milligan, which we did. After implementing ex parte Milligan according to their rules and the Accardi doctrine counts, they recognize who we are, and they have to deal with it in their jurisdiction, dealing with us. So we, however many show up when Tanya calls the grand jury together, because we have a large enough pool of Oregonians that have declared their status. When Tanya calls the grand jury together, enough show up that we have a grand jury, and we did. And when we had a trial, let me finish, Charlie, I've finished this. And when we had a trial in Salem, it wasn't a mock trial. It was exactly as correct as we could possibly make it. And it was in the open and in public. And not only did 12 jurors and 3 alternates show up, but we had 20 people, 21 people show up, and they all signed the verdict. So I think that we're doing it as close as we can get to being correct. And I think that they have to recognize this. And I yield.
And I'll just add to that in terms of numbers. When you look at numbers, if you want to compare systems, you could actually say that even though we have in the Jural Assembly have done these actions, we actually represent a quiet populace who are not really sure what to do, but we are representing them, much as, you know, our legislators who are voted in. I have so many people I run across who totally are in support of what we're doing. They've actually signed their bona fides because they support us, even though they may not sign up for a jural position or, you know, be involved in our meetings. We represent those quiet people, that percentage that you referred to. So we're doing the work of the people, even though we're the ones who are showing up. There are more of us than are signed up to do the work. Oh, go ahead, William. Did you have?
Yeah, I also like to talk about the people that would really like to sign up, but they are in fear.
Right.
They want us to test the waters first before they step in. So
Exactly.
they need to be spoken for too.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, we represent all of that. I mean, there are many different levels of the people who want to be involved or who support what we're doing or don't understand it. There's a lot of people who really say, well, you know, I like what you're doing. I'd like to be involved, but I just don't know anything. So that's another factor of fear. It's a different kind, not out of intimidation, but just out of a feeling of not knowing. So anyway, I yield.
Well, let me respond to some things. And, you know, the first thing I want to say is I applaud your effort or I wouldn't have been here, right? I applaud the process or I would not have been here. I applaud the approach. I respect that you treat yourselves as having inalienable rights and that therefore you are authorized to protect those rights in a variety of ways. I don't want to get into the weeds about mock trial, Ron, but what I would say about it, and my only problem with it is that unless there is an enforcement arm to it, it is an act of, it's an act of response, rebellion, if you will, speaking out, civil disobedience. And I think that's all good. I'm not saying that's not good. I'm just saying that if you cannot enforce it, then you don't have the power of law. That would be my comment. You have a comment about
that? Yeah. I don't think enforcement is an issue. And I'll explain my point of view on that, and I think we've got it right. When the enforcement issue came up, and it came up quite a while ago, and we were looking at how in the hell do you deal with that? What we found was that the militia, the 3%ers, the Proud Boys, and all of those folks were in fear of the statutes that were available to the law enforcement on Oregon that made them criminals, made them paramilitary, made them domestic terrorists, and they were prosecuted on that. And what they would do is they would arrest a guy for being a domestic terrorist or a paramilitary, and then they would dismiss those charges, but they would put them on probation for 18 months to make sure they didn't make any more mistakes. So then, if the guy did anything wrong, he was breaking his probation and they would put him in jail again. And it wasn't for the original charge because that charge had disappeared. So we looked at that situation of organized and unorganized militia and what they were going through, and it looked pretty clear to us. We wrote up a document and notified all those same people that the Oregon Statewide Jural Assembly was also to be known as Oregon Second Amendment Well-Regulated Militia. And we filed that paper and they acquiesced to that. And on the 29th of January, 2021, we became the Second Amendment Well-Regulated Militia. So as far as an enforcement arm goes, I think we've got one. But to back up from that a point, when we made a presentment to the 38 prosecutors on Oregon, the job of enforcement became their job. They had a lawful presentment from a grand jury to do a specific function. And they had all the information necessary to do that. And that became apparent. But then, how do we force them, the prosecutors, to recognize us and to ensure that we have the standing? Because when you read the documents, we have it. But if they decline to recognize us, then what's the issue? Well, we decided the issue was if our verdict is published into the public record and it becomes public record, a $, Charlie, if it becomes a public record that we are who we say we are, then when we take that public record of the document of our presentation to the 38 prosecutors, we say that we have proven and provided the evidence that they must comply with our presentment. I yield.
All right, so let me respond to some of this, okay? I would say to you that it is obvious if you present your conclusions, your judgment to the powers that be, whether they be prosecutors or law enforcement, sheriffs, etc., and they ignore you, that you don't have the power of law. Now, that's de facto. If you want to take, that's not de jure, that's de facto. Basically, those folks are saying you don't have the power of law. I think that we are in danger, and I say this with respect to the conversation you and I've had, Ron, just now, is that if we stay in the weeds about what works and how we're doing it and how we come up with our fundamental belief, what I'm going to say is that there's a problem with that, and it's not just true in Oregon, it's true all over the nation. We have all kinds of objectors, okay? And let me give you an example. We have people that are divided. A third of the nation that doesn't like what the government is doing are divided by these petty differences. And I don't care whether I don't think it makes any difference whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent. You made some comments earlier about civil liberties and libertarianism. You've got socialists and progressive. You've got religions, the whole spread of religions, and people that say, if these guys come up with it, they're illegitimate. We've got the so-called white supremacists. We've got the Black Lives Matter. We've got all the rest of this stuff, and they're attempting to divide us. And they're attempting to divide us in 459 different ways so that we sit in these little petty groups of 10 or 12 or 20 or 30, and then we all get picked off one by one. And what I would say to you, it doesn't matter whether the earth is flat or round. It doesn't matter whether 9/11 was nanothermite or nuclear or drones or holographic. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether Kennedy was assassinated by the CIA or by Cuba or by the FBI or anybody. None of that matters. None of it matters. We can argue about it in 5 or 10 years. What we need to do right now is all agree on one thing. We have an illegitimate government that is not respecting the fundamental rights that we have. Let's agree on that. And what I would say to you about the peace, and let me go back, because I want to respond to the lovely prayer you gave, Charlie, and that has to do with the I am. Where does the I am come from? Well, it goes clear back to Buddhist times. It goes clear back to who and what is the I am, right? It goes back to the righteous indignation of Jesus at the temple. We have the right to object. We have the right to exclaim our personal rights. And what we all need to do as citizens is we need to have 10 million of us in this country. We need to have 120,000 of you in Oregon that says, we can disagree on all kinds of things, but we can't disagree that we are about to lose our right to disagree. We are about to lose our right to disagree. And the most critical thing that we have is the right to speak out and for me to disagree with you, Ron. And we need to protect that right to disagree. And so where we are right now, we are so close to going over the cliff, so close. And I think if we continue to argue petty things, we're going to end up still in argument as we go over the cliff, as the lemmings all push us right over the cliff. So what I would say to you is I understand that there are people that have fear. That's part of the process. Do you think that was any less so when they were terrified of King George? No. Did you think it was any less so when the Brits came to their door and said, we're going to be staying in your house and you're going to be providing food and water for us and a place to sleep? Was it any less true when they added taxes on at the Tea Party? All of those things are true. What we need to do is to get people to recognize that their petty fears about somebody discombobulating them somewhere pale when you look at somebody dragging you out into the street and forcibly injecting you with DNA modification against your will.
Or destroying your business.
Or taking away your personal property, or denying you the right to protect yourself, or not ever letting you go to church again where you can get together with the people that are there, or freely speaking out against what's being here and being determined, as I was, either a bully or a liar or some kind of, what is that, fake news kind of person. Even if I'm wrong, even if I think nanothermites were used or that Sandy Hook was some kind of a setup, I have the right to say so. And we've got a guy, Jim Fetzer, right now that's facing $1 million worth of penalties, civil penalties, because he wrote a book that said, I don't believe this is true. And nobody has the right to even talk about it. Yep. He didn't even get the right to present it to the courts. So, and let me look at one more piece, and I'm going to tell you that this is apropos pertinent to your situation, our situation, including me. When we had the falsity of the election of 2020, we had Sidney Powell and others come forth and say, boy, when we get to the courts, we're going to show them what's wrong. And I'm going to say that's parallel to the trials and determinations you guys have. What was wrong with that? Well, I complained about it from the start. And the reason I did is there's one court that matters. You know what that court is? It's the court of public opinion. And where she should have taken her proof, her facts, was to all of us. You know, these details about the election have dribbled out and dribbled out. Little tiny pieces of it have dribbled out months after the election was determined. And in November, they should have been spraying us with it. And so that when the federal court systems, you know, we had something like 88 courts, state and federal courts, that dismissed the Trump claims that there was a false election. And none of them even looked at it substantively. None of them even looked at the facts. And why is that? Well, because the court of public opinion hadn't pushed on those judges. Those judges are all in the bag. They're all in the bag. Congress is all in the bag. They're all 100% in the bag. If you think Jim Jordan or Mark Meadows or one of these guys is for you, or Rand Paul, you're full of crap. None of them are. So what makes it work, if there's any semblance of potential for the system that we have now to recover, to right side itself, is that for people to say basically to those federal judges, by damn, we know what happened. And if you ignore it, we will not tolerate it. You will not be able to live in this community. We will not tolerate it. Do I mean that we're going to hunt them down like Maxine Waters told people to do about the conservatives? No, I'm not going to quite say that. I'm not going to quite say that. But the only thing that's going to work in the current constitutional system, as long as you treat it as authentic, and that's effectively what you've done even with your court thing, you send it off to the prosecutors. Well, that is an acknowledgement of the legitimacy of the Oregon government as it exists. Let me finish, because this is really important. And I'll give you, you have all the time you need, Ron. What we have to say is it's delegitimate. It's delegitimate. And we can prove it, and partially you've done that, is that when you show that a court case has demonstrated the delegitimacy of certain officials, and nobody will do anything about it, you have proven to a level deeper than you did before you started that it's delegitimate.
Yeah.
Therefore, the constitutional system, the state constitution, and I'm not, obviously, not any kind of an authority about what Oregon Constitution says, but you saw, Ron, when I sent response to some of your stuff, there's a bill of particulars that includes 20, 30, 50 items of federal and state violations of Constitution that delegitimizes the entire government. And so really what I would suggest that you need to do is use what you did as the trial to show the delegitimacy of the government, and to show that what they failed to do in response to your sending them the judgment further delegitimizes them. Further. And so you basically give them a short period of time to respond. And I don't know what the best issue to pick in Oregon is. I don't know. But whatever that best issue is that gets 125,000 people out of fear and standing behind you in some fashion or another is what you need to do. Because what Sidney Powell failed to do was to get the court of public opinion to stack up so tall that the existing system that's there can no longer deny. They know they're going to be tarred and feathered and driven out of town and taken out of office if they don't do what the people want them to. That's what we have to do. That's where I see it.
Or embarrassed out of office.
What's that?
Embarrassed out of office.
Yeah, they need to be so embarrassed that they resign, or that they're afraid to show up at the Dollar General in town. They're afraid to show up. They won't go to the restaurant because they're going to be heckled out of there by constitutionalists that say, no, you cannot delegitimize us any further.
That is happening more and more. And I will say that we are doing what you suggested, which is that we are building our cases one on the other, because when we give it over to the de facto and they fail to do their job, to do their duty, their oath has been broken, and we follow up with another round, and it's building and building. And we are up for that task, because, we just simply need to hold them accountable. And if they're not accountable, then we let them know. And the more people who are involved in what we're doing, who see what we're doing and recognize, yes, they're being called on this. So that's how we're doing it. And it's fear forward. We have to do this. It's our job.
Charlie.
Yes.
So, I was talking to Greg and about today and the conversation, and we just heard Greg's opinion and his views on it. And Ron, I think you've always known Greg's views on it. But what I said to Greg was, they are doing something up there. In fact, you have to start somewhere, and you guys are way beyond starting. I mean, you guys it's incredible what you're doing. My goal today was picking of great minds was to say, okay, with all the magnificent work that you guys have done, incredible. What's the next step now? How does this thing, and I'm not saying get to 100,000 people, going down Main Street tomorrow by any means, but I think that there's a happy medium in between what Greg's saying and what you guys are doing. As far as it needs to be elevated, there needs to be a special sauce that gets in this mix here to take the next step. And that was my goal today. And I don't know. And Ron, go ahead. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, on the building part, when we filed presentments, which is half of what the grand jury did, the other half is a true bill to the de jure. But when we filed presentments to the 38 prosecutors on Oregon, then they have a decision to make. Now, we file that paper with them on the 9th. That's when it became apparent that our de jure court had found these 4 people guilty and provided a verdict. The presentment we gave to them, they haven't acted on it, but they haven't not acted on it yet. We have started, and we're looking for project managers, for lack of a better term, or a case manager, because we have 4 convicted that are going to 38 prosecutors. So that gives us like 152 separate docket numbers that we have to follow through on, so that we say to the District Attorney of Washington County, Kevin, what are you going to do? And Kevin will tell us what he's going to do. And the choices are nothing, something, you have no standing, whatever the de facto decides to do with that presentment is on that particular prosecutor. Now, will they actually prosecute? Don't know. Doesn't make a lot of difference because that isn't our jurisdiction. They're entitled to do whatever they want to do in their own jurisdiction. But the Accardi doctrine says they have to abide by their own rules.
Ron, what if they came down, grabbed you, William, and Charlie, and locked your asses up tomorrow? Then what happens to the Oregon Statewide Jural Assembly? And I'm not trying to be a smart aleck about that. I'm just literally think that's an interesting question.
Cynthia, Tanya, and Eric, and Mark, and Fred, and half a dozen others would step up, and they would elect 3 new people into the action committee, and they would move on, and they would go get our writ of habeas corpus that we've made up, and they would supply the jailer with the writ of habeas corpus from our lawful court, and then they could do whatever they wanted to do with our writ because we can't control that. But if they don't do what is required by a writ of habeas corpus, and we are in that jurisdiction, then they become a criminal, and we'll deal with that. And Charlie and William and Ron, cancel, with their ass in jail, would be doing their job, and those on the outside would be doing their job. And it doesn't stop. Somebody said to me yesterday, what are you going to do with this old man when he goes away? Well, hell, we got a bunch of young men and young women that are going to step right into it. So that doesn't bother us. We're solid, and we're going, and we're growing every day. We picked up 30 brand new members yesterday. Just one day out in the public at a Second Amendment rally.
Awesome.
Yeah. William?
Yeah, I'd like to say our leader is up above.
That's right.
So
Yeah, we're
the leader down below here in our group. We are together assembled, and our numbers will vary up and down as we continue. And I claim that they're going to just keep going up and up and never go down from here.
Yeah, there are too many people now who see that there's a problem, a serious problem. And I really do believe, you know, the enforcement of the COVID has been actually to our advantage, not only for filing with the UPU and not having to serve personally, but also so many disenfranchised people, so many people who are out of business and actually now have more time to participate in civil action. And so I think that we are really sitting in a good spot in time. And I think also, if you want to do the above, as above, so below, we actually are growing in consciousness. We're growing in our own knowing who we are. And that when we know who we are, and that's why that prayer is, because when we know the I am, we are fortified, and we know that we are doing something that is beyond self. This is service to other, and it is right action. It is goodly, godly. We are guided, and we are manifesting based on who we are. We are people. We are humankind on the land who are fighting for one another's survival. And it is, as you say, Greg, absolutely critical. We are at the cliff, and we know that they're going to kill us one way or another. So we might as well fight the good fight. And we're here to do it.
Right on.
So let's look at go ahead.
I would just say,
let's look at some pieces. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let's play with the system that you have as it exists now and where you are. You convicted apparently, and I'm not in the weeds on this, so I cannot speak to the particular. You apparently convicted 4 people, and these are Oregon officials. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
1 governor, 2 senators, and a representative.
And the senators are state senators or federal senators? State. And those state senators
Oh, I'm sorry.
They're the United States senators.
United States.
Oh, U.S. senator. Yeah, I'm sorry.
From
right,
Oregon.
Yeah.
So the jurisdiction then is statewide. So let me make a suggestion to you. And I'm not sure where it goes, and it's maybe a total waste of time. But if the prosecutors who are abroad an indictable message, in other words, that you, the citizens, have judged this person in violation, and the prosecutors do nothing, then they are as culpable as the people that were charged, correct?
Right. Correct.
So if it were me, I don't know what county Portland's in, but obviously that's your capital, right? And that's
no, Salem. Marion
Salem.
County.
And the county in Salem's where? The county that Salem's in?
Marion.
Who's the prosecutor in Marion County?
Do you know, Ron?
Clarkson.
Well, the point is, we don't need to know the name, but the point is if that person was taken, those charges in those files, that's the person that in most critical circumstances, if you had a governor that was engaged in bribery, let me just use it. That's the county attorney that would take that to start with, and or the AG. And so both of those people are primarily charged with violations that would occur within that county. Okay. So if you had a prosecutor that wanted to make noise, wanted to make a name for himself or herself in that county or the AG, they would take the governor on and they would say, we're charging you with the following crimes. That is as true now as it would be for bribery or for, any one of a dozen other things. And so the failure of those prosecutors to do that is also a crime.
Right.
And
Yes.
and so I would give them a limited amount of time, and then I would make them the subject.
That's what we're doing.
But at some point, you've got to get enough noise about it so that people say, well, that bastard's not doing anything. Therefore, it's time for me to step forward, because that's what will draw people into your space. So, yeah, you keep going down. And every time that a person appears in public, there are 20 people asking questions. Right. And they don't let him in or out of the room without videoing him, making him answer questions, pushing on him, because that's part of what's going to get your people to sign up. They're going to say,
I think it was in your state. I may be mistaken, but wasn't there a school board that just got replaced by the people because they marched into the boardroom and they said, you're fired. We don't like what you're doing. And our kids aren't going to wear masks, and you're not doing this.
That was up at Tucson. Yes.
Yes. So there it is. That's a good example of exactly.
Yeah, but these guys, what I'm saying though, and apparently you guys are already on it, and I'm not in your loop, is that these people need to feel the heat. They need to feel the heat. It isn't just that this is 20 people complaining to the county attorney. They need to feel the heat. They need to know that they're accountable, and that their accountability is going to fundamentally reflect on the way that they're doing their job.
Yeah, we have deputies.
And possibly it, what I would be tempted to do is go find an attorney, if there is such an animal, that agrees with you. Okay. I don't know how many of there are, and I don't know how many of them have any guts, but to run against one of those prosecutors and to announce at this point that he's running and start to show up at public events and at political events and at the Republican and Democratic conventions and the rest of that, and say, I'm running against this guy because he fundamentally violates the law of the county. And by God, I am going to prosecute these things if he doesn't. And it puts him. What's that?
We just a little bit of money because we know what prosecutors run on, right? We give them money and they'll go do it whatever we tell them to do. That's what they do. If there's enough money involved, they'll just go do it. We find one and say, hey, would you run against this person? Here's some money. And they would just go ahead and do it. We know what kind of people they are.
You need to, what I would say to you as someone who feels that he was that he had a legitimate law degree and that he lived a life using that law degree legitimately, okay? Is that on the face of it, if you're hiring somebody to be the snapping bulldog that takes somebody out because they violated your civil rights in some fashion or your property rights, yes, you can hire somebody to do that. I'm going to tell you that in order to take the stand that I just suggested and to take a place in public office, that person is going to have to violate all of his business sense. And he's going to have to violate how much he's getting paid. And he's going to have to, he or she, let me be clear about it, is going to have to step forward and say, look, I know that this is not going to be popular and that some of my clients are going to leave me because of it. I watched a guy today, a doctor, medical doctor, who announced on BitChute that he was not going to let any jabbed people into his office because he felt that it would violate the protection of the people in his staff, including a pregnant woman.
From shedding.
That's a person who's stepping out of the space. And that's what you need, is somebody to step out of the space. Yeah, you need.
I would like to believe that there's some good attorneys out there. I haven't met any yet. You're not one now, so I can say that.
Yeah.
But I have not met any yet. I have used ones that I thought were good people, and they ended up stabbing me in the back, my partner in the back. You know, it's just horrible. I believe that they run on money, or they're being run by.
It's way worse than that. It's way worse than that. It's
by the not Illuminati, the Freemasons. I've seen some Freemason attorneys.
You don't have to go that high. Here's the deal. You don't have to go that high. So when I disqualified a judge in Montana, I became persona non grata. That's not supposed to happen with the bar. Okay. So there are two things that happen. Number one is the judge you disqualify, you are now always out of his favor. Always.
Oh,
and then because of the way that the state set it up, the state court system and the Supreme Court system, is they let the judge that was disqualified pick the person that you get to deal with. So they find the most irascible piece of shit from 400 miles away that you have to deal with. And then when you challenge it and take it to the Supreme Court, and I'm one of the 2 or 3 people in 40 years that have done that and challenged the process and the disqualification process, you know what they did? They gave me the brand new judge from a neighboring county that was going to have to deal with the judge that I disqualified. And they put him in the place of besmirching his own neighboring judge that he was going to have to work with for the rest of his career if he went with me. So on 3 counts, and then guess what they did? They changed the law of disqualification to make it harder because they thought that I had found a loophole. So, and that's in Montana. And Montana, I still have a better chance of having real law be carried out in Montana than any other state I can think of.
Yeah.
I know Arizona's not as good, and I damn well know that Oregon's not as good.
Speaking of Montana, I was born in Montana. Does that give me any continuous rights in Montana, even though I'm in Oregon?
No, of course not. No, you've chosen to be an Oregon resident. One of the things that Ron said is, you get this right to opt in or opt out. And I'm going to say to you that when we acquiesce as a body politic to a certain form of government, we are no longer in the place of singularly opting out. And not to tell you I disagree. I mean, you do whatever you want to do. I don't think that there's any state, there's any jurisdiction, and frankly, probably not any national government that's going to let you walk in and say, well, yes, for the other 14 million people in this country, they're all citizens and we have jurisdiction over them. But you, because you say you're not, that you're somehow exempt. I think as a body politic, and this is really critical, and this goes back to my earlier comment about decommissioning the government because it no longer has legitimacy, and one of the things that you'll look at, if you look at treason and sedition and the statutes that were passed by the United States government, do you know when those were passed? 1948, under Harry Truman. Mm-hmm. And all of the crap that they knew, because you know what was concurrent with that? The CIA. And they knew that once you say, well, gee, how long have they known this? Well, they've known it since 1948. They knew in 1948 that they were going to have to somehow quell and chase down people who said this government's not legitimate, and we're going to criminalize the challenging of the legitimacy of the government. And they formed sedition laws. And we say, well, gee, that's just a form of treason. But the answer to that is no, it's not. You should have the right to say that the government is no longer legitimate. But, frankly, it's a lot easier to say the government's not legitimate in Oregon than it is to say the federal government's not legitimate. I think you guys are on the right track.
Either constitution, though, right?
What's that?
I can just grab either one of those constitutions and just show them. I don't have to say anything. All I have to do is go read here, and if you can't read, I'll read it for you.
Yep. No, there's no question about it. When they fail to follow the basic tenets, the fundamental underpinning, which legitimizes them as the government, which makes me subject to them as a citizen, when they no longer follow the basic tenets of what they were given. Because if you see the term as inalienable rights, it's not what the government gave you. I know you guys all know this, but it's important to say this. It's not what the government gave you. It's what you held unto yourself that you could not and would not give the government rights over, the inalienable rights that you have. And the whole basis of our constitutional form of government, however you look at it, the whole basis of it, from the time we began objecting to George III, is that we have inalienable rights, and that those inalienable rights you don't get to have. You, the federal government, do not get to have. And originally, when they formed the Constitution, they said that the rights which were not given to the federal government were reserved unto the individuals and or the states, right?
That's right.
So there are, and concurrently, the state of Oregon or the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or anybody else, none of them can take the fundamental inalienable rights either, because we're not going to give them to them. And if you look at any of their constitutions, the constitutions, all of them acknowledge that, Excuse
Go
me.
ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Well, I just wanted, 3 words come to mind. Citizen versus denizen. When we use the word citizen, to me, that means that we belong to the government. We are not citizens, okay? We're denizens of the land. And the other thing
excuse me.
Go ahead.
When you look at Klaus Schwab, who says that you're not going to own anything, you're going to give everything up, and you're going to be glad you did it, it is the fundamental form of communist government. And I say that not just because it's communist. I say it is equally applicable to the technocracy, which is the capitalism gone mad, as opposed to communism, which is socialism gone mad. Where do we end up? We end up at the lowest common denominator, which is 500 people run the world. It doesn't matter how you get there. It doesn't matter whether the Chinese give it up communistically or the United States gives it up because we have capitulated to technocracy. We end up with the same 100 people running the world. And what we need to say is that we have fundamental rights, and that those fundamental rights will not take us to that lowest common denominator. And if you are exactly right, Charlie, if people don't see that their petite fear of little things that could go wrong because they stand forward, if they cannot see that that is superseded by the fundamental right that they're going to lose all of their freedoms, if they can't equate 2 of those in a fashion that at some point says, I got nothing to lose. I have to stay forward.
Here's the thing too, those of us who have a nice house and enough food to eat and clothing up to the wazoo, it's our responsibility, if not as much more, to be willing to risk whatever it is, because we are at that critical juncture. And the other 3rd word that I was going to bring up, was revindication. We need to reclaim ourself when we were put into the bond of ownership by the Admiralty, by the commercial. So revindication is reclaiming who we are on every level, whether it's spiritually or physically or monetarily. We must revindicate. We must know, first of all, most people, just like I just heard a mask wearer yesterday say that, well, she's fine with what Governor Brown has said because she knows the science and she's following the health authorities and blah, blah, blah. Well, time to get off the bandwagon and time to be pushing it.
You're not going, we talked earlier that 30% of the population, and maybe it's 50, and in some states it's probably 60, you're not going to get them off the dime. They're not, but the rest of us can. There are two comments I make about being an objector. One of them is, there's this classic post-World War II comment, they came and got the Jews, and I'm not a Jew. They came and got the gypsies. I'm not a gypsy. They came and got the Catholic priests. I'm not one of those. They came and got the dissenters. And finally they came and got me, and there was nobody else to protect me. That's the first one. The second one that I think could not be more apropos. What I do to take a look at the way that our world is unfolding is I stir 1984 and Gulag Archipelago. Okay, put the two together. No, I'm serious. Put the two together and see where you come out. And when you technocratically, I would love to sit down with George Orwell because when I would start to explain the 60606 patent of Gates and how they can manipulate our brains and the remote declocking of our brainstem to kill us, and the forced vaccines and the forced travel and the digitalization and the satellites that can track our every movement and are obviously listening to us at this very moment and have put this stuff into digital form in Salt Lake so that they can pass it around to the world and include it in the Five Eyes presentation they've given, that every one of these stupid little things on our phone that keep saying, yes, if you'd like to do X or Y or Z, you've let us have full access to your phone, right? And so all of these things are there. What Solzhenitsyn said, first of all, to talk to Orwell and say, if you had written this stuff in there, they would have thought it was crazier yet. And it'll blow your mind what I'm going to tell you they have the capacity to do. If Stalin had had the technocratic skills that are available now, the communist system would never have failed in the Soviet Union. Okay, that the people would still be subject to it because you would have had absolute control. So what did Solzhenitsyn say, which parallels, Charlie, what you just got done saying? Solzhenitsyn says, if when the police in Moscow came to get somebody on the 5th floor of their tenement, those police officers didn't necessarily leave the building. It would have changed the entire Soviet system. It would have collapsed around itself. But because everybody acquiesces, we have people in this country that are now applauding first graders because they're telling the authorities what their parents are talking about. When I was in grade school, that's how we characterized the Soviet Union and why we didn't want to be there. Right. And now we've sanctioned it. It's craziness. And so when the people begin to see, as your engaged parties know, that if they don't do something, their first grader is going to be telling them.
That's right. William?
So they did that in Germany also, using the kids against us. So if we take that as a clue, our assembly actually needs to start educating the children out of their hands. We have this opportunity right now under COVID where we have a good chunk of time with our children and our grandchildren, and this is the opportunity we have to take when they don't have our kids. They had our kids 5 days a week, for decades and decades and slowly got us to this point. Now we have our kids. It's like an opportunity that's been handed to us to grab a hold of those kids' minds and bring them back into the reality of the free country, the republic that we were taught, at least back when I was in school in the 70s and the 80s.
Can I respond?
Please.
You know, I totally agree with you philosophically.
Mhm.
What I'm going to say to you practically, and this has to do with my conversation earlier, the lemmings are at the cliff.
Mhm.
Yes, teach your kids whatever you can teach them. But if we're going off the cliff, you can teach your kid whatever you want to. And that splat you hear at the end is him or her never recovering from this. You know, when they forcibly vaccinate people, or when the airborne emissions from the vaccinated, from the jab people impinge upon our rights, and we have done nothing about it, it will no longer matter. And so I see the cliff from here. People tell me, people ask me, I have a friend of mine who got vaccinated, and he said, well, what about this year and what about that year? And I said, we're not going to have that time.
That's right.
What these guys, what the technocrats have done, and people say, well, gee, it was just an exercise. This masking, COVID, just an exercise. Yeah, so was SARS, so was AIDS, so was everything else. So was 9/11, so was 2001, so was 2008 when the crash came. It was all artificial stuff. And with every one of them, you can say, well, it was an exercise. You know when it becomes an exercise? When they hit the limit, when they hit the wall, then they back off. It's not an exercise until they say, God, we've exceeded our grasp, and so we'll back away. And 2 years from now, we'll come up with something new. So nothing's an exercise. Everything. A friend of mine had a term. I love this guy. He used, when he wanted to get something done, he had a term he called benign leaning. And we can exercise that same thing. But what you have to recognize is the bad guys know about malevolent leaning. And malevolent leaning is they keep leaning on you. And if you push, they say, oh, okay, I'll wait. I'll lean, but I'll wait. And the next time you back away 3 feet, they lean more. And they're going to keep closing in. I mean, let's take, for instance, let me tell you one of my frustrations. A couple of years ago when we had that, when Virginia was going to decommission all of your firearms, right? State of Virginia. Mm-hmm. And that idiot governor there was going to do it. So everybody lined up, and a couple 100,000 of them showed up at the Capitol. It was at Richmond, right? I'll get one of my capitals right before the day's up. So they spent a whole weekend walking around with their shotguns and their AR-15s, and they stayed off the campus. And everybody went home and said, "Yeah, hey, we got it done." And what they forgot was that for the last 40 years, there's been malevolent leaning. And the day that they drive away from the Virginia Capitol, malevolent leaning is still there. And so it's going to creep and push and creep and push. And Jefferson told us that's what was going to happen. That government which governs least governs best. Guess what? That's still true.
Yes, I've been just so alarmed at the compliance with COVID and the mask wearing. And then, of course, the immunizations, when they make it so that it's difficult to get, everyone wants to get it. The compliance and the willingness to go along with is just, I think it probably shocked the cabal as much as any of us.
And that's why the exercise.
They were surprised. Yeah, surprised at how.
They expected they were going to have to do plan B, plans. Well, and the other thing I'm going to say, and this is not, primary grist for today, but I have for some time felt that everybody, all of us feel that these jabbed people are most at risk, and that over the next 3 years, this is what's been touted, right? The next 2 or 3 years, they're all going to die off, right? Well, I'm going to tell you that's not true. That isn't to say that they're not going to die. That's true. But most of us who have assumed from that basis that we will be the survivors, right? Well, let me tell you, If you gave me 20 minutes with the bad guys and they said, give us your own most evil way of doing this, I'd say, well, obviously what we have to do is get rid of the objectors first. Okay? We're the objectors. We have to get rid of us first. The rest of them are easy. They're all AI. We can satellite decommission them anytime we want to. If you want to watch, what is it, Our Time with Justin Timberlake? Have you seen it? Put it with 1984 and Google Archipelago and put that Our Time on with a tattoo on the inside of your arm, and your time is only as good as that day, and see where you end up. You put the three of those together and you will know exactly where we are. And that's where they're planning on having us.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Well, on that note.
You know, that's the problem I had. It was always too damn dark, you know, that's.
Yeah.
Well, I said to Jeffrey,
let's look at the bright side of this, and forgive me, William, I don't mean to take away your time, but let's look, before we lose this, let's look at the bright side of this. More and more people are objecting, more and more people are joining, more and more people are coming against the edge and recognizing they're not going to get jabbed, they're not going to have their guns taken away, they're sick and tired of not being allowed to go to church or to assemble, they're watching people be decommissioned from YouTube and everything else and saying, we cannot, at some point, we cannot stand that. And more people are stepping forward and saying, you just crossed my threshold, okay? That's what we need to have people see. You just crossed my threshold. And I think probably what we need to be able to do is to somehow in the hypothetical say, well, what would cause you to draw a line in the sand, okay? Would this cause you to draw a line in the sand? Well, you know, if I had to wear a mask, that'd probably be okay. Would this cause you to draw a line in the sand? And someplace, these people have to say, well, there's my line in the sand. By God, if they're going to do that, I'm coming out of the woodwork. And then you say, all right, well, it's happening. Can you see it? Come out, wherever you are.
I think that's great. Thank you. This has been a really wonderful roundtable. I really appreciate you being on this, Greg and Jeffrey, for making it happen. And does anyone have anything else they want to add to it? I think that's a great place to end, because we have to end with hope and we have to end with action. And I know that when we're aligned and we're undivided, and that's the key, we really need to assemble all assemble and override any kind of differences so that we recognize humanity versus the unhuman, which is really what we're up against. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty simple, pretty clear, black and white.
I promise to send money.
Well, Charlie, let's go back. It is the I am. And as each of us recognize, as each of us gets to that sand point where we won't let them cross that, and they say, no, I give up my I am. I cannot be I am anymore. If you cross that barrier, then collectively the I am says, no more, collectively.
That's right.
We the people are the collective I ams, and we will not let you do this.
Correct. Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been wonderful. And I hope we have an opportunity to do it again soon and cover another maybe more particular area, or even update in terms of any kind of progress that we've made, which will certainly be. So thank you. Thank you so much, every one of us, for being here.
Thank you.
So I'd like to tell everybody to go to our website, go to our Facebook, go to our YouTube, even though, you know, they're evil things, but we still use them to gather the people together. Start your grand juries in your states. Oregonians, come join us. We're having fun doing this. Thank you very much.
We have a template. Yeah, we have a template. You can do it in a month. Just do it. Fear forward.
Thank you.
Thank you for the great opportunity. Truly, I feel honored to be called.
Very nice. Thank you. We're honored as well.
Thank you, Jeff.
They do not want to let go of this. They do not intend on losing here. And we do not intend giving it back to them.
And then the bullets started flying. And then he jumps out of the car. And he's got both his hands up.
And he got out of the car, and he had his hands in the air. He's like, just shoot me then. This is what you want, to shoot me. And they did. They shot him dead. With his hands in the air, and I saw it. I swear to God. He was just walking with his hands in the air. And they shot him. And they shot him dead, and then after he was down on the ground, they shot him 3 more times.